Hello and welcome to another TLDR global video. You might already be aware that the 2020 Tokyo Olympics were delayed for obvious reasons, and they're now set to take place in July and August, despite surging cases in Japan in recent weeks and a ban on international travellers. Anyway, with Tokyo's Summer Games now back on track, eyes are beginning to turn to the next Olympics, the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. And when I say eyes are turning, I mean controversy is rising. So in this video, we'll discuss the controversy surrounding the Chinese Games, and why some countries are discussing boycotting the 2020 Olympics entirely. Before we start, I'm pleased to announce that because TLDR is growing, we're moving office into a new, bigger space. That means we have to move a lot of stuff though, so we're holding an office clearance sale. All of our merch is discounted, including all of our badges for only $3.99. But we're also selling office things like our sofa and our fridge. No, seriously, we're selling them. So check out the store if you want a pin or even our sofa. It's linked in the description. China was awarded the Winter Olympic Games all the way back in July 2015. Initially, a lot of countries and cities seemed interested in hosting before 6 officially submitted their bids. Krakow in Poland, Lviv Ukraine, Stockholm Sweden, Oslo Norway, Almaty Kazakhstan and Beijing China. However, despite a lot of interest and 6 official bids, the International Olympic Committee, or IOC, didn't end up having that many choices for their host. That's because Krakow pulled out following a referendum, Lviv delayed their application because of the Ukrainian crisis, Stockholm pulled out due to a lack of political support, and Oslo withdrew because one of Norway's governing parties objected. This left the IOC with Kazakhstan or China, and with the votes counted, China won by a very small margin, 44-40. This was semi-controversial at the time. The country had only just hosted the 2008 Summer Olympics. Some of the outdoor venues didn't have reliable snowfall, meaning that snow might need to be imported at great economic and environmental cost. And some were also worried about the environmental impact of building on mountains adjacent to Beijing's Songshan National Nature Reserve. Despite this, everything went ahead as planned, without attracting too much attention, with the Asian superpower building venues and preparing for the Games. Issues started to arise, with global attention beginning to turn to the Xinjiang Papers and the Uyghur Genocide, as well as China's actions in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and the country's so-called wolf warrior diplomacy. We've actually made videos discussing the first 2 before, but let's quickly outline these controversies. The Uyghur Genocide is where Muslims in the Xinjiang province of China have been routinely oppressed, imprisoned without due process, and forced into labour. This is on such a scale that it's become the largest scale and most systematic detention of ethnic and religious minorities since the Holocaust, but there's more on that in the full video. In Hong Kong, China's working to dismantle the region's democracy, pulling it into China's orbit and limiting free speech and rights, while in Taiwan, China is becoming increasingly aggressive, with some fearing that the country might invade in an attempt to pull Taiwan back under their control. But there's more about both of those things in the videos too. Finally, wolf warrior diplomacy is a phrase used to describe the aggressive diplomatic strategy used by China in recent years, epitomised by the 2020 incident where a minister circulated a digitally manipulated image of a child's throat being cut by an Australian soldier, in an attempt to escalate tensions. All of these controversies have shaped the global perception of the superpower, with many politicians and global democracies turning against China. This has ultimately trickled down to the public too, with perception of China dropping, with the vast majority of countries having a negative view of China. In fact, Pew Research found that unfavourable views of China reached an all-time high in 2020. Due to this, there's mounting international pressure on China, with countries taking action to try and discourage the controversial behaviour we've discussed. One such suggestion, and the one mentioned in the title and thumbnail of this video, is boycotting the Olympics entirely. The idea being that if countries refuse to send athletes, then they won't be supporting the Chinese Games, either economically or politically. Boycotting the Games not only sends a message, but also delegitimizes the competition, and limits the PR and propaganda benefits that China hopes to receive from the Games. And this is a point really worth emphasizing, because hosting the Olympics gives a country a ton of attention and clout. Think back to the 2008 Beijing Summer Olympics, where billions tuned in to see China's successful and well-run games. The Olympics are clearly about sport, but for the host city, it's all about projecting their brand to the world and communicating a clear message. Clearly, China was hoping, at least when they submitted their bid, that the 2022 Games could do a similar thing and really solidify their place on the international stage as a true superpower and a challenger to the US. And the Games do seem to have already increased the spotlight on China, but maybe not for the positive reasons they intended. Instead, countries which are troubled with China's humanitarian record and their attitude towards Hong Kong and Taiwan are cautious to support the Games, fearing that China will become further boosted and encouraged by the 2022 Games, exactly why the calls for a boycott first emerged. Now, boycotts have clearly been used to some effect in the past, although their track record is a little spotty. But this wouldn't even be the first high-profile Olympic boycott. That's because in 1980, the Summer Games were held in Moscow, which at the time obviously was in the Soviet Union. It's no secret that during this time period, the Soviet Union wasn't universally popular, but this was only exacerbated by the Soviet-Afghan War. To massively oversimplify things, in 1978, a Soviet-supported communist government took over the country, a move which was unpopular with both many Afghans and a lot of the Western world. So in response, the idea of boycotting the Olympics was seemingly first raised in a 1979 NATO meeting, before being backed by the likes of the Carter administration, with them proposing the boycott as a response to Soviet actions in the region and various human rights violations. Initially, many NATO members weren't too keen on the idea, but it did begin to snowball, with more and more countries backing the move as tensions continued. Interestingly, it was at this point that Carter suggested permanently holding the Games in Greece to prevent political struggles like this from overshadowing the Games. The IOC rejected the proposal at the time, and obviously continues to move the host city with each event, but this decision may be coming back to haunt them now. Anyway, the idea of the boycott continued to gain momentum until the Games themselves in 1980. In the end, countries boycotted the event entirely, refusing to let athletes attend the Games, including the US, Canada, Japan, and West Germany. 6 countries allowed athletes to participate if they wanted to, but they had to compete under the Olympic flag rather than their home country's banner, with this group including the UK, Australia, and Ireland. 3 countries, Spain, Portugal, and New Zealand, participated but under their National Olympic Committee flags. 7 more countries did participate in the Games under their national flags, but boycotted the opening ceremony in protest, including France, Italy, and the Netherlands. The point is that major boycotts like this have happened before, with countries refusing to take part for human rights abuses and political moves. Interestingly, the Soviets and 13 other Eastern Bloc nations boycotted the following Olympics in retaliation, which is unsurprising considering that the Games were held in Los Angeles, who, weirdly enough, will be hosting the 2028 Games in a few years' time, so maybe we could see another retaliatory boycott on the cards. Anyway, I'd be interested to hear what you think of this issue, because while the boycott might seem like an okay solution, if you think that China should be punished for their abuses that is, there are some serious side effects to such a decision. Athletes around the world, across a huge variety of disciplines, have been training for years for these Games. Not just the athletes, but their teams, trainers, family and friends have put in effort and support for years, if not decades, leading up to this moment. Taking away the opportunity to compete on the international stage and against their best competition would clearly be a devastating blow. Also, millions of fans would likely be disappointed as they're losing a thrilling sporting event that could bring the world together at an already divided time. Now, these sacrifices likely pale in comparison to said human rights abuses, but it's easy to see where this disappointment would come from. I mean, look at this cartoon from New Zealand in 1980. It's a pretty illuminating illustration of this argument. Boycotting the Olympics might be a big attention-grabbing move, but if you're going to continue trading and working with said country, then are you really stopping them, or just hurting your own athletes? After all, who says that a 2022 boycott will even work? The Soviet-Afghan War continued until 1989, so even the most powerful historic example doesn't seem to have worked. The IOC's attitude seems to be that politics shouldn't be brought into this at all, but the problem is that hosting the games is an inherently political opportunity, a chance to flex on the international stage. In 2008, China showed their ability to do this and used the games as a political and economic tool. So many argue that they shouldn't be given the platform to do the same thing again. The US seems to be contemplating the best move they can make at the moment, with the Biden administration apparently considering a boycott, which means at the moment we don't yet know if the US would participate in the boycott, or even if they take the lead like they did in 1980. Pressure isn't just being applied to countries though, with sponsors apparently under pressure to pull out of the games too. So it'll be interesting to see if the public or private sector moves first, and what actually ends up happening. What do you think of this situation though? Is it a good idea to boycott sporting events for political reasons? Should China be punished for their human rights abuses? And if so, should the Olympics be used as a vehicle to do it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.